Hello, welcome to everyone joining me today. My name is Leonore-Namka Beschi, and I am the Curator of Interpretation and Engagement at the Art Gallery of Alberta. And this is AGA Live. So, while we're all going through these uncertain times, and let's face it, we surely did not expect living through a pandemic. Here at the AGA, we want to help you stay connected to art, creativity, and ultimately spend some time with you. So you might be familiar with some of the programs that we offer on a regular basis, or simply new to it. What matters today and brings us together is that curiosity and desire to learn through looking at art together, and possibly take our mind for a walk. So I'm thrilled to be your host for the next little while and share with you compelling perspectives around the themes of our current exhibition, Roy Caussy, The King is Dead. This exhibition is currently on display in the RBC New Works Gallery, but as you know, it is not accessible to the public until further notice due to COVID-19. So without delay, I'll begin this program with an introduction of the artist, Roy Caussy, and the curator, Lindsay Sharman, who both envisioned and created this exhibition. I will then highlight some of the core themes stemming from this installation for us to reflect on. And in the process, I hope to catch on some of your comments you may have. You're welcome, of course, to use the chat window on the side of your screen to share your comments as you follow this presentation. And I will do my best to make this as interactive as possible. So let's start with the premise of this exhibition and how this artwork came about. So Lindsay Sharman is our resident curator of the Art Gallery of Alberta, and prior to joining us in 2019, she was the first curator of the Founders Gallery at the Military Museums in Calgary, which was an academic appointment through the University of Calgary. Her curatorial research is politically and socially engaged art practice. This exhibition, The King is Dead, presents a commissioned work by Canadian artist Roy Caussy, currently based out of Medicine Hat. The final installation in the gallery space is the result of a continuous dialogue between those two, with many iterations of what the project could look like. Caussy's work often revolves around serendipity, intuition, and associations, with research interest in World War II and the emergence of a youth demographic and youth marketing. His practice also focuses on the question of diasporas, as well as the tension between our egos and our interconnectedness as human beings. So, of course, let me come back. Of course, I invite you to check his website, and I'm going to share with you the link right away. There you go, in the chat. Okay. So I invite you to check out the artist's website to learn more about him and his contemporary practice through previous work. Before talking about the exhibition concept or the artistic motivations behind this installation, I'd like for us to get familiar with the work itself in its physicality. And unless you visited this exhibition already, you may have seen fragments of the full installation on our social media, but I'd like to take us for a tour in the gallery. So hold on a second, bear with me. I will pull up the gallery tour.
Hello, this is just a real quick tour of Roy Caussy's exhibition installation, The King is Dead. Let's go in and take a quick look at this here. Here's the sculptural installation. Give you a quick look around the entire piece. Some interesting detail here as well. You can see down below here. And just some other interesting additions here. So that's just a quick peek at Roy Caussy's installation, The King is Dead.
So what are we looking at? There are many ways of approaching a work of art. And here are some of the questions that I usually ask myself. What are the different elements that constitute this work? Are we familiar with some of those objects? How do these objects relate to each other as well? But also, I'd like for us to ask ourselves, how do we as individuals relate to these objects? So I'm going to go back to the work. 1 second. Here it is. So when I first experienced this work, one of the things that immediately caught my attention was the small replica of Botticelli's Birth of Venice. Now, what attracted me to it is not only its central placement, almost like a focal point or a bright spot in the eyes when you enter the room, but it was also its aesthetic, contrasting with the rest of the installation. I also noticed concrete blocks and what looks like the base of a bathtub. I also noticed some sculptural objects, organically shaped and made out of ceramic, 2 golden eggs, and what seems to be beer cans. So in other words, a variety of elements that do not necessarily belong with each other, and yet they are stacked together or against each other to create what I would call this architectural structure. At this point, I'm curious to know what your first impression is as well. So please don't hesitate to share your comments in the chat window. I'm going to go back to the full screen and start looking at your comments. So I realized that those images cannot replace the in-person experience, of course, and you may, the experience you might have in the gallery space. But I'd like to know what and how do you feel when you look at this installation. So let's see if anybody wants to comment. I see. Okay, no comments yet. Don't be shy. All right, so I'll move on. Okay, I see Guy. Guy is saying, I'm trying to understand the purple objects. What is the material? So we'll come to that. Oh, shrine-like. Okay, Sarah is saying shrine-like. Cool. All right, so, one might feel confused on what to make of it. One approach to discovering a work for the first time is to let yourself be guided by your instinct and feelings before even intellectualizing your emotions. In his interview with Lindsay Sharman, Roy Caussy himself talks about the importance or the power of confusion, which offers that room for interpretation and allows visitors like us experiencing the work to inject their own thoughts, their own point of view into the work. And so by doing that, as viewers, we develop a personal connection with the work. And in this process, we might even discover new layers of meanings. An example is that when I spoke to the first thing that attracted me to the work, I noticed the Botticelli Venus because it took me right back to my art history courses at university. So that was for me the entry point to the work. But that is not the only one. So the overall setup resembled a man-made architectural structure, exhaling a feeling of sanctity or spirituality, a shrine, as Sarah would say. The general atmosphere in those images leads us to believe that we are entering some kind of sacred place. So all those improbable objects are gathered into what looks like a pyre as well, ready to be lit. And I wonder if you will agree with me on what I'm about to say, but I sense a certain fragility and vulnerability looking at the way the structure is built. And here is a close-up of the installation that illustrates what I'm saying in terms of fragility and vulnerability. There's a sort of ephemerality to it. The structure is clearly not built to remain the way it is or resist to the passage of time. Although we have concrete blocks and a heavy bathtub that are here to support the overall installation, we also have planks and rods of wood that are thin and stacked onto each other, almost like a match house. And as one knows, pyres are heavily symbolic in the cremation ritual carried during funerary ceremonies. In many cultures, these customs celebrate life through the process of freeing the spirit of the dead to the afterlife. And maybe one of the most known examples we can refer to in modern history is the cremation pyre tradition carried by Hinduists and Jainists on the river Gange in India. So let me pull up a visual for that. Yes, so here is a screenshot from the National Geographic documentary, Death Along the River. So talking about cremation, the process itself has an interesting story taking us all the way back to ancient history. Cremation dates from at least 17,000 years ago, with the oldest human remains of a man and a woman ritually cremated found at Lake Mungo in Australia. In the Western world, and Europe in particular, what is now known as Central Europe, there are traces of cremation dating to the early Bronze Age. Now, the custom became dominant throughout Europe with the unfilled culture, which is that tradition of placing the ashes in urns before burying them in the field. And if we fast forward in our history, it's also interesting to note that this practice was once forbidden by law, starting in the Middle Age, for instance, and even punishable by death if it was combined with pagan rites in Germany, for instance. In the mid-19th century, a movement to reintroduce cremation as a viable method of body disposal began and was made possible by the invention of new furnace technology and, of course, contact with Eastern cultures that practice it. Now, as history tells us, this practice also refers to some of our darkest moments. During World War II, Nazi Germany used specially built furnaces in at least 6 extermination camps throughout occupied Poland to dispose of the bodies of those murdered by gassing. And I refer to this gloomy detail in relation to Caussy's interest in World War II, as mentioned previously. So this brings us to think about the act of burning, which expresses concepts of destruction, but also cleansing and rebirth all at the same time. So this pyre standing in the gallery and about to be lit forces on us a certain contemplation. There is a certain gravity to it. And without needing to know the artist's intentions, the installation is an opportunity to be alone, I think, with our own thoughts, guiding us into reflecting on the past and to imagine new beginnings. Now, let's talk about the ceramic objects and possibly answer Guy's question. So yes, let's talk about the ceramic objects and the poetic use of clay. When I think about clay, I think about the expression "to have feet of clay," referring to someone's weaknesses or character flaws. And somehow I see it fitting well with the notion of fragility and vulnerability that I was, mentioning previously of the overall structure. If we think about the properties of this organic matter, clay is also versatile and malleable. It has a certain plasticity to it, and yet it becomes firm and sturdy once it's fired in a kiln. So one can connect this simple fact to the image of a child maybe affirming himself while growing, entering into adulthood, possibly. Now, the different characteristics of clay make it one of the oldest building materials, also used as a natural seal to fill the voids in any type of structure. So here is another view of the structure. This installation showcases Roy Caussy's own artistic vocabulary that he developed by creating these amorphous shapes, or ghosts, as he calls them. Almost body-like and made of organic matter, they can be perceived as well as a presence filling the room with us. In his interview with Lindsay, Caussy also talked about the connection to his Southeast Asian heritage and how being part of the Indian diaspora in Canada impacted his own practice and the visual representation of the object that he creates. So for instance, how in his work, he refers to certain forms, amorphous forms or colors seen in his childhood and on Hindu temples, using those memories as a source of inspiration to generate those blobby, let's call them like that, blobby shapes. So let's progress in our look at the work. And one thing we can notice are two eggs, or golden eggs, on each side of the pyre, also made of clay and ceramic pigments, like gold. So this fine connection between the different elements on display gives a sense of continuity in the use of natural elements throughout Caussy's work. And similar to clay in its properties, gold is also physically and metaphorically one of the most versatile metals on Earth. Can be malleable when melted. Gold also holds the potential to transition, to transform itself into many different states. It can be dense, it can be soft. So I'm curious to know, what comes to mind when you think about gold? Think about your perception of this precious element. Gold is one of the first metal ever used by humans, and prospecting for gold was common for centuries before it was ever used as money. This precious metal reminds us of the first settlers, pioneers possibly, and the gold rush in the mid-19th century. It was considered as a commodity. It is still up to this day. And the expression of devotion, power, wealth, and greed. So as a result, this train of thoughts also brings us to, I think, meditate on human behavior towards the planet we live on. It leads us to contemplate once again our actions and possibly the self-entitlement with which we exploit the resources we stand on. Now I'd like to go back to the egg. Let me put this back, yes. I'd like to go back to the egg on which the gold is applied and talk about its shape itself. And let us think about the metaphors that are held in this primal shape of the egg. Not only it symbolizes wealth, the egg symbolizes wealth, but it also holds this potential for change. A passage from a few words from the artist, who says, on one hand, the egg alludes to an unknown and unwritten future that is not locked in, but full of optimism and possibility. On the other hand, the egg contains... So it sounds like the egg is the perfect vessel for storytelling. A piece of gold, a lump of gold inside the animal, cuts open the goose, and of course also made in ceramic. So for Caussy, the beer can illustrate the normalized and stereotypical behavior in which cultural and social beliefs are passed on from one generation to the next. And in her essay, Lindsay Sharman makes an analogy to masculine ideologies that are passed from father to son and ingrained into younger generations. I can safely say that we all have this mental image or possibly flashback of a first sip of beer given, to us or from a father to his son, which can be interpreted as an act of socialization and almost like a rite of passage into adulthood. Now, here is another example, a close-up of a beer can. Now I'd like to move on from the ceramic objects to a special encounter with Venice, or should I say a knockoff version of one of the most popular ladies of the Renaissance period, originally painted by Sandro Botticelli between 1482 and 1485. The Birth of Venice has become a landmark of 15th century Italian painting and Western art history in general, actually. Her imagery is rich in meanings and allegorical references to antiquity. So I'm just going to pull up the original painting. Here it is, by Botticelli. And the core theme of this painting is inspired by Ovid Metamorphosis. So we have that notion of transformation once again. And in Roman mythology, Venus was the goddess of love, sex, beauty, fertility. Born of sea foam and washed ashore in a shell, she was the Roman counterpart to the Greek Aphrodite. Except that she had a few more abilities. She was also a goddess for the Romans. She was also the goddess of victory and even prostitution. Well, in other words, she was an object of veneration for many. Images of Venice have been found in countless forms, obviously paintings, mosaics, shrines, even domestic murals and fresco, and of course, sculptures. Venice was often depicted nude for obvious reasons, her natural beauty and sexual nature. So this dollar store replica presents a caricature of sexualized femininity, really, steering away from its original iteration, which I think was slightly more restrained. I mean, she does have the hair, the wind in her hair, but it's a little bit more tamed. But this replica speaks to the social norms and stereotypical expectations from society, conveyed earlier by the beer cans, what we were talking about when we were mentioning the beer cans. Also notice the petite size, the miniaturization of the object of this replica, which I think is far off from the kind of glory a divinity deserves. And notice as well, here it is, notice as well that the price tag has been left on its base. So similarly to the egg, she too holds the power of change and transformation. Lindsay Sharman makes an interesting connection as well of her rising out of the sea to the rising sea waters, which are a clear signifier of climate change. So while we might consider what rises from the ashes of a pyre, we might also speculate on what will rise from the ocean, from the oceans during and after human-caused environmental collapses, but possibly as well during a life-changing event like the one we currently live in, during pandemic times. So what causes us to behave in such harmful ways with our planet and to be so detrimental to ourselves and future generations? Is it just all for greed? This work in particular, I think, poses the questions, what will it take for this worldwide generational tantrum, let's call it that way, to stop? When will this egotistical mindset to leave a mark on everything surrounding us shift once and for all? And why can't we accept the fact that we are possibly insignificant in the great scheme of things, and that we are too made of organic matter? So these are not particularly hard questions. We might just not like the answers, as they forces us to, those answers force us to re-examine our daily routines and the realities that we've created. And that brings me to one more element in this installation that we haven't talked about yet, which is the Mickey Mouse hat. So here it is. So the Mickey Mouse hat is also a collectible, a paraphernalia, or an object of a certain devotion from our childhood and possibly adulthood. For most North American kids and most of the world now, it is a customizable takeaway from a magical world and surreal time spent at Disneyland. It's a hat you can stitch your name on, so come on. It's the ultimate embodiment, pretty much, of capitalism and the cult of self that was created in 1955 for a generation of baby boomers. So as a brand, Disney constructed a reality where dreams come true and where boundaries between reality and imagination are blurred to become the happiest place on earth. So, are you confused now? Are you embracing the power of confusion and wondering where is this going, and what is this exhibition really about? Let's go back to a full shot of the installation. And let me see some of your comments. The cans are connected to recycling, which is a fun, modern take on rebirth. Oh, I like that comment, Sarah. What else? Okay, it recalls Botticelli. The Venice recalls Botticelli, but it's not quite. A gaze is different. That's very true. She's more demure. That's true. This makes the piece feel very tender. So we've talked about the funerary tradition, that is cremation, and the restoring notion of fire. We've talked about this installation holding the potential for contemplation and awareness for past actions. We talked about the social norms and expectations that tie us and future generations as well together through the imagery of the egg possible futures, and the beer cans. And perhaps we've even instigated a reflection on the society of consumption we live in. We've also spoken to possible futures and realities, dark or bright, through the memorabilia that is Venice and Mickey Mouse hat. So, using a childlike logic and playfulness to create this work, Caussy looks back to our legacies and what can emerge from what is left behind. And by combining atypical elements, unique in their natures and symbolism, he then creates a surrealist narrative in which I would say a myriad of meanings can materialize. Remember, those elements can be read either in contradiction with each other or in conversation with each other. We have a female, male, and in balance with each other. This monument exists for an imagined child, or better, it possibly speaks to the nostalgia of a child in us and the burning desire of experimenting things. So let's go back to the installation. Caussy's spire sits in the gallery on top of a shower stall and ready to be set alight. But the question is, who will light it? And what will rise from the ashes? And I'd like to quote curator Lindsay Sharman on this. And she says, by offering this spire to a younger generation, Caussy is literally passing the torch in hopes of empowering youth to envision and create better futures. So let me ask you, what sort of futures can be imagined after that fire, or after a world-changing event like this pandemic? What is inevitable and what can be changed? So let's see, what are some of the comments? Struck by the beauty of the individual objects, puzzled by its title. So the dead king, Andrea says, so the dead king is our dying overly large egos, our cultural narcissism. Possibly, I would say so. So, let me go back. So I'd like to leave those questions open. Obviously, the intention is not to exactly answer, to give an exact answer for each questions. But I'd like for you to keep, those questions in mind and almost like some sort of food for thought for the coming days. And I saw a number of questions asking about how the ceramic objects were made, what was the process, the fact that it was commissioned, and so how all of that went down. So I'd like to say that much more can be read on the subject in the online RBC New Works exhibition catalog as well, which include the essay by curator Lindsay Sharman. And of course, I invite you to visit the AGA website and to find it under About the AGA and Publication. Or you can as well click on this link, which I will be sharing this way. There you go, in the chat, and that takes you straight to the online version of the publication. I would also like to recommend the Artist and Curator conversation, in which you will learn about all those details you've been asking about. And so this hasn't been published yet, but it is about to be published. So stay tuned as we announce the publication of this interview on our social media outlets in the coming days. And of course, if you have further questions on this exhibition, please do not hesitate to email us at marketing@youraga.ca or reach us on our social media platforms. It will be my pleasure to answer those questions or redirect them even to the curator as well. So I'd like to conclude by saying that our AGA team continues to work hard to bring you art and creative projects to do at home and engage with you daily. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay connected with us. Bye-bye.